me boring the pants off you guys. And again, I hope that everybody who's checked in, they are in good health, their family is good health, and their loved ones are in good health. I will apologise for now because there was meant to be a guest appearance by my 9-month-old Chihuahua called Bryn. However, we had a visitation last night by a fox, and we all know what dogs like when it comes to foxes doing things in your garden. So as it stands at the moment, he's being bathed in the sink, so there may be a late appearance by him, but the smell would have been, I think you would have smelt it down the phone here. Yeah, that's dogs here. So struggling to come up with something, but I thought, as I sort of hinted on it last week, as this year is the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, just to give a bit of insight into what we, especially in the association, tend to celebrate around Wings Appeal Week, which is Battle of Britain Day. And for those who don't know what Battle of Britain Day is, it was the 15th of September 1940, and in 1940 that was a Sunday. To give a bit of context for those, most of you will know what the Battle of Britain is. The Battle of France finished on the 22nd of June 1940. There was a breathing space, to put it bluntly. The Germans were already making an appearance over Britain, but the Battle of Britain officially started on the 10th of July 1940 and lasted until the 31st of October 1940. It was divided into a number of phases. The Germans don't call it the Battle of Britain at all. For the Germans, it was another addition to their campaign, the Battle of France and Poland and everything else. And basically what they had to do is, it was in preparation of Operation Sea Lion, which was the invasion of mainland Britain. To do that, they had to nullify the Royal Navy. So the first phase of the Battle of Britain was to try and sink Royal Navy ships, or to attack convoys in the hope that at the same time it would pull the RAF and the Royal Navy out. This was then followed around about the 12th of August, sorry, about the 11th of August 1940, when they started going for more mainland targets, which then rapidly became radar stations and airfields. This continued then until the end of August 1940, and to put it bluntly, the RAF at that stage was at its knees. We were losing more aircraft and more pilots than the Luftwaffe was, and of course the Luftwaffe had the ability to restock it. The airfields were being pummeled and pummeled and pummeled. RAF Manston in Kent, you're actually seeing that a lot of guys there, because the airfield was being attacked every day, that a lot of guys were being admitted to hospital in Margate with what we now know as a shell shock, PTSD. It was, such an easy target for the Germans. They'd get airborne, they could see Manston, and they would pop over, bomb it quite regularly and disappear back again. But then it all changed. 7th of September 1940, the Luftwaffe decided that to bring England to its knees, and probably as a result of us bombing Berlin, brackets, that's a loose term, because if Bomber Command could get a bomb anywhere within 5 miles of its target at that stage in the war, that was regarded as a success. The Germans decided they would go for London, and that was what happened on the 7th of September 1940. We've all seen the film The Battle of Britain, where all the pilots are waiting for things to happen at the airfield, and of course what was happening is they'd moved all their fighter assets into the Pas de Calais. For those who are interested, those who go shopping at Cité Europe, that actually was the site of a German fighter airfield, and you can see how close it was to Kent to get across. The reason why the Luftwaffe had to do that is because the bombers could make it to London, but the fighters only had a limited time. So I think we touched on this sort of last week, is that they would take off, they would then formate with the bombers, they would have to throttle back with the bombers to keep with them. They would then leave the bombers on the outskirts of London. They'd have about 15 minutes combat time before then they would pick the bombers up and go back again. So the Messerschmitt 109 fighters had it very, very difficult. And of course, by that stage, the Luftwaffe was finding the twin-engined Messerschmitt 110 was actually not that suitable for close escort, especially against a tenacious enemy. This all came to a head on the 15th of September 1940. Now, it may come as a surprise to you that the actual attack on London, it wasn't a complete day of the Luftwaffe attacking again and again and again. The Luftwaffe actually first arrived just before midday, and then they departed. Their last aircraft had departed around about 3:30 in the afternoon. But in that interim period, a lot had went on. From a German perspective, the day started very, very early. About 8:30 in the morning, they'd sent a weather reconnaissance aircraft up from Paris, which was intercepted by 2 Hurricanes of 87 Squadron. And I've found, as anybody can do, you can find online now, if you go to the National Archive site, the combat report for that day. So the first loss of the Luftwaffe on Battle of Britain Day. And it says as follows. 2 aircraft, blue section of 87 Squadron, that was Flying Officer Dennis David and Flying Officer Trevor J, left RAF Exeter at 08:35 hours to patrol Dartmouth. 08:45 hours, a Heinkel 111 was sighted at 6,000 feet. Blue 1 attacked first out of the sun, and the enemy aircraft was apparently surprised. Blue 1 delivered a beam attack and a stern attack. The enemy's port engine stopped, petrol poured from both wings, undercarriage dropped, and the rear gunner who'd been firing all the time was apparently killed. Blue 2 then attacked from astern, giving 2 long bursts. The enemy aircraft was not seen to crash, but our pilots were certain that it was destroyed. It went into the sea south of Dartmouth, taking all 5 crew, which included a senior weather Met forecaster, and was never seen again. So that was the first attack of the day. But then the next one didn't occur until 10 to midday. The Germans decided they would just throw everything at London that day, and it started with fighter bombers. Now, fighter bombers, as we touched on last week, were a new idea. Putting a bomb onto a Messerschmitt 109, the Messerschmitt 109 goes in and is then capable of fighting on the way back. What they did, the Me-109s took off after the German bombers which were following them. They overtook them. The RAF ignored them because the RAF wanted to go for the bombers. Fighter Command were after the bombers because the bombers are the ones which were going to cause the death and destruction. So they allowed these 21 Messerschmitt 109 fighter bombers to attack London. They dropped their bombs and they returned. And it was reported afterwards, and it got back to the Germans, that we, the British, regarded putting bombs on a fighter aircraft as something very un-British and not fair. However, despite them dropping the bombs and getting back safely, they were immediately followed by a massive formation of Dornier 17 bombers. Again, Dornier 17, the flying pencil, the aircraft that everybody seems to associate with the Battle of Britain. But it was a bit of a disaster from the start, which was to our advantage. The German aircraft got airborne, and unfortunately for them, they went into a layer of cloud, and the formation was forced to break up, because you just don't take a risk in a formation of 3 aircraft, 3 aircraft and 3 aircraft and 3 aircraft of going into cloud, because you're going to hit. So they then split up, went into cloud, then reformed above cloud, which all took time, and of course gave radar in Kent and radar in Sussex the chance to actually detect the German formation. To make matters worse for the Germans, and to our advantage again, was that they then encountered a headwind which was coming exactly the right direction to slow down their approach into London. It also did the same thing as well as slowing down the Messerschmitt fighters. Of course, those fighters had got up. They then had to wait for the bombers to formate. And of course, all this time, the Messerschmitt fighters were using up fuel, and their combat time was being limited. The formation approached London, and that's when the RAF pounced. Of course, this day was the day when the RAF used what is called the big wing theory, and this was something that Douglas Bader wanted to do, which was basically you get all the aircraft on your station, so all the various squadrons, you get them together, you formate together, and then you attack the German bomber formation. But more of that later, because that's when it becomes very, very effective. The German bombers were going for Battersea Power Station, areas around that part of the Thames. They managed to get in, didn't do very much damage, but of course then they were harried in by the Spitfires and Hurricanes all the way in, who then made a mess of the formation as the way came back out again. all of this time, the German fighters were holding off over northern Kent because A, they didn't want to take the risk of being hit by anti-aircraft fire, and they wanted to save their fuel. The most spectacular loss on that day was the aircraft which everybody thought was deliberately there to bomb Buckingham Palace. It wasn't, but in fact the aircraft, when it was attacked, its bombs did land on Buckingham Palace. And the most spectacular view of the day, if people can see that, that is the aircraft itself, or what's left of it. Its wingtips have gone, its tail's gone, and the crew have bailed out. Most of Fighter Command claimed that aircraft that day, but it's credited, the actual final destruction went to a Sergeant Pilot Ray Holmes of 504 Squadron. And again, if you want to go online, you can see his original combat report at the National Archives, and he reported this as follows. In the attack made by 504 Squadron, I attacked the right flank machine from quarter to astern. Pieces flew from the wings and a flame appeared in the port wing but went out again. After breaking away, I climbed up a single Dornier 17 and made 2 quarter attacks. Pieces flew off. My windscreen was now splashed with black oil. I attacked a 3rd time and a member of the crew bailed out. On my 4th attack from the port beam, a jar struck my starboard wing as I passed over the enemy aircraft, and I went into an uncontrollable spin. I think the enemy aircraft must have exploded beneath me. I bailed out and landed, and as I landed, saw the aircraft hit the ground by Victoria Station about half a mile away. The bomber didn't explode, he actually collided with it. The collision ripped off his wing, ripped off the Dornier's wing. The Dornier also went into the spin, which resulted in its tail snapping off and its wingtips snapping off. And again, we've seen in the film The Battle of Britain, was it Edward Fox was the one who actually lands and you see him sort of sliding down a roof and into a dustbin. Well, that was Ray Holmes. He actually did end up, he thought he was going to be in trouble. His parachute snagged on the roof and literally, I think his feet touched the lid of the bin, and then 2 kids came out and released him from his parachute. And yes, the Dornier 17 did smash into the forefront of Victoria Railway Station. You can actually still see the scars today where the aircraft actually went down. Of the German crew, all 5 bailed out. 2 were killed when their parachutes failed to open. 2 were captured, and the pilot, sadly, landed amongst a very, very angry crowd who then beat him up. And sadly, he died of his injuries the following day. Now, as all these bombers were fighting their way into London and fighting their way back out, the German fighters were having an absolute nightmare, even before the aircraft they're meant to be looking after reappeared. And one pilot was a guy called Herbert Schopper. He was a Messerschmitt 109 pilot, and he just got engaged to his girlfriend that day. The day before, and he was on an escort mission and was holding off over Kent. And his report gives a fairly good idea of what was happening to the German fighters the same time what was happening to the German bombers. And these are his words, which were dictated to me some years ago. We were flying about 3,500 meters and had to fly with our flaps down so we could stay close to the slower bombers. During a turn, we were attacked by Spitfires which came out of the sun. My wing lead was hit in the arm and he broke away, and my plane was hit in both wings. I wanted to get back to France and tried to hide in the clouds, which were just below me. However, when I came out of the clouds, I was hit by a second burst, so I threw off the cabin roof and undid my seatbelt. Now I think that the drills I learnt in flying training then saved my life. We were often woken up at night and had to say what to do if we were hit. Throw off the roof, undo the seatbelts, jump out, pull ripcord. A third burst hit home, and from the instrument panel there came flames like an oxyacetylene torch, and my hands and face were severely burned. An explosion followed, and I found myself hanging on a parachute. To cut a long story short, he'd been bounced by a Spitfire of 41 Squadron. On the 3rd burst, his Messerschmitt 109 exploded. The NE 109 pilot actually sat on the fuel tank, so it was not a good place. Like the Hurricane, you've got a lot of Hurricane pilots were burnt because the fuel tank was ahead of them. On a Messerschmitt 109, if you hit the cockpit, the NE 109 had a very good chance of exploding. He actually sort of landed not too far from Ashford in Kent, and a former RAFA member who contacted me many years ago was a 17-year-old schoolboy there who ended up joining the RAF and being on mosquitoes at the end of the war. He actually captured him. He was out shooting in the woods and saw this combat occurring, and he rushed across to this he was fairly badly burnt German pilot, and captured him and then handed him over to New Zealand troops nearby. And Herbert Schopper, the German pilot, I put the two of them in touch with each other many years ago. Sadly, both are no longer with us. And their stories matched up exactly. Now, this is all occurring about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then what we're seeing is this battered formation is now returning back to France, where a new formation of German bombers is coming across. Unfortunately for the German fighters, it was a case of getting back, refuel, rearm, and come back out again. They were putting up tons and tons and tons of aircraft to sort this out. And again, the target this time was not Battersea Power Station, but was a little bit further across to the east end of London. Now, during this attack, even more RAF fighters were thrown in the battle, and the Germans actually this day actually thought that because the RAF was so desperate that there were suicide tactics, because in the big wing, because there were so many Spitfires and Hurricanes around, there were so many people keen to actually get in and get into the kill. We have two instances of Hurricanes colliding with German bombers. The first was flown by Pilot Officer Paddy Stevenson of 607 Squadron. He came in too close. He realized if he banked left, he was going to hit his wingman. So he thought, right, well, I might as well just go for the bomber. He managed to get out slightly injured. And the second one was Pilot Officer Mike Cooper Slipper of 605 Squadron. Exactly the same thing happened to him. The first Dornier, all the crew were killed. The second Dornier, all the crew survived apart from the pilot, who was the last person to bail out, and he bailed out too low to his parachute failed to open. So it wasn't suicide by the RAF pilots. I think those who remember back to the AOC 11 group a number of years ago, who actually said that he would expect in a Cold War situation that perhaps his fighter pilots would do the same. It was just, there were just so many RAF aircraft in the air. They were all vying to get the aircraft. And again, a good account of exactly what happened. I had two accounts for it, but this is a chap who contacted me who lives in the States. And he was a Dornier 17 pilot. His name was Josef Stoidel. And he gives exactly what happens. The Germans were flying in three columns of aircraft to attack that day. So a left column, a middle column, and a right column. And it was a solid column of bombers going across there. And he actually describes quite well what happened. Today was the first day we flew in what was known as a wedge formation. Over Amiens, we met up with the remaining aircraft from our unit. Then we flew to Cambrai and then on to Etaples at a point where we would meet with the fighters. The approach was too long. We were tired even before the attack. At the coast, we had to circle as the fighters were late. After that, I had a very uneasy feeling because we saw no fighters ahead of us, although about 60 of them were meant to be behind us. On top of that, our formation was in disarray. Over the southern edge of London, our fate awaited us. Our fighters had once again allowed themselves to get entangled in dogfights, and we were unprotected. Suddenly, a tight formation of RAF fighters appeared close to us. At first, we thought they were our own, but we were mistaken. A formation of Spitfires were flying directly at us, firing all guns. They avoided a collision only to veer off at the last minute, some above us, some below. Several even had the nerve to fly right through the formation. I automatically hunched down behind the instrument panel, even though that was useless. In this attack, my plane was not hit. The frontal attack by the Tommies was a completely new tactic that split up our formation. After that, they had an easy game as they could hunt and shoot us down individually. The two planes to my right veered off below me as I was pursued by a whole pack of Spitfires. My three crew shot out the back as far as their guns could muster. My observer was hit. A bullet ripped away the little finger on his right hand and smashed his machine gun. The cloud now became our saviour. I headed east in order to reach the North Sea as fast as possible. Ice now began to form on the wings, so I dived to get below the freezing level. But we were directly over the Thames. I had to get back into the cloud. A second time we pushed the cloud and we were still over the Thames, so went back again in. The third time we were above a convoy. So yet again, we had to go back in. And that was the way it went until we reached the French coast. And only then could we breathe easily again. Now, this was exactly the same. The German bombers were badly mauled. The bombing of London was ineffectual, yes, and I'll give evidence of this towards the end. But to cut a long story short, that initial attack around about midday and this second attack around about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Luftwaffe actually reported that day that a total of 148 bombers had attacked London between what they say is 12:50 hours, which is 11:50 hours our time, and 1600 hours, which is 3 o'clock our time. They dropped 5,000-pound bombs, 2 500-pound bombs, another different type of 246 250-kilogram bombs, 11 250-kilogram bombs which were filled full of oil, 50 delayed action 250-kilogram bombs, 967 50-kilogram bombs, and 108 incendiary containers. They also admitted that throughout the day that the RAF fighters' defences were too strong for them. They lost a total of 20 Dornier 17s, 18 fighters, 8 Heinkel 111s, 3 Messerschmitt 110s, and 3 Junkers 88s. But they claimed 51 Spitfires, 26 Hurricanes, and we can't understand it's a single Bristol Blenheim. Today, we can say that despite the RAF claiming 185, they lost a total of 56 bombers and fighters, whilst the RAF lost 28 fighters, of which 12 pilots only were killed, 12 wounded, and 1, Sergeant John Potter of 19 Squadron, strayed a bit too far back chasing the bombers over the channel that he was shot down and, would you believe, taken prisoner. The actual attacks on London, rail traffic, yes, it was disrupted, but just for 3 days. But London continued onwards. And there's a very interesting account by a German pilot who was shot down that day, who actually expected, when he was captured and taken into London, to see the death and destruction. And he wrote this as follows: "My first sensation when I saw the damage caused by our bombardment in London was one of complete amazement. I had pictured altogether a greater degree of destruction, but only very few houses were destroyed and all the traffic in the streets carried on as normal. In Hyde Park, people were sitting peacefully on chairs and benches, just as if nothing had happened, and bus, tram, and underground services proceeded with astonishing frequency. The bomb crater was an exception in this peaceful picture." That night, the Germans returned, and what we're seeing now is the start of the Blitz. They continued to bomb London then right through until May, but to put it bluntly, 15th of September was very much a turning point for the Luftwaffe. It was a failure. The casualties suffered by the Dornier 17 unit especially meant they never, ever, ever flew again in massed formations in daylight. It was just too dangerous. It proved that Fighter Command was definitely not on its knees. And now they had to switch to nighttime raids and nuisance raids and smaller formation raids. And of course, as we all well know, as a result, Adolf Hitler indefinitely postponed the proposed invasion of Great Britain. 25 minutes to give you a rough idea of that's Battle of Britain Day. Everybody thinks it was a big day, but remember, from the RAF point of view and from Fighter Command's point of view, essentially it was 3.5 hours to 4 hours of which our future held in the balance. And I hope that gives everybody, when you come to September this year and when we're out collecting, exactly what happened on Sunday, the 15th of September, 1940. Thank you very much.